The world of 1939 was a landscape violently cleaved in two, a stark, moral topography defined by the gathering storm of war. In this absolute dichotomy, the luxury of neutrality had vanished, consumed by the demands of total conflict. Loyalties were meant to be clear, clean, and unassailable. You were either with the Democratic Allies, poised to fight the existential threat of fascism, or you were with the totalitarian Axis, marching toward a world reordered by conquest. The intelligence services of every nation operated on this rigid binary, trusting only those who had definitively, irrevocably, chosen a side. But deep within the churning chaos of World War II, a figure moved with terrifying grace through the shadows, a phantom who defied this fundamental law. He was a man who, in a time of absolute loyalty, refused to choose. He was an anomaly, a quantum particle of espionage, existing simultaneously in two opposing states, a man whose sole allegiance was not to a flag, a people, or an ideology, but to the intricate, deadly, and utterly mesmerizing game itself. His name was Emil Hartmann, or at least, that was the identity he had constructed, the meticulously tailored cloak he wore in the dark hallways of wartime London and the sterile, bureaucratic offices of Berlin. It was a name that had no provenance, no birth certificate, no academic record, and no family history that could be verified by either the British Security Service MI5 or the German Abwehr military intelligence. Emil Hartmann was a creature of pure, operational necessity, a human abstraction forged in the fires of geopolitical intrigue. To the Germans, specifically the shrewd, disciplined officers of Abwehr Section 3, Emil Hartmann was a masterpiece of clandestine infiltration. He was their most valuable, most reliable, and most deeply embedded agent in London, a source code named Nachtfalk, Night Falcon, who provided tantalizing, seemingly critical details about the disposition of the Royal Air Force, the morale of the British cabinet, and the internal workings of the shadowy MI5 itself. They believed him to be a deeply patriotic German, cleverly positioned to influence the highest levels of the enemy's war machine. He was a lifeline, a symbol of their superiority, a man who spoke with the true voice of the British establishment. To the British, however, Hartmann was known by the codename, the Albatross. He was a prized double agent, a rare and crucial asset embedded deep within the Nazi intelligence network. MI5 case officers viewed him as a profoundly disillusioned German officer, a man who had seen the monstrosity of the Nazi regime and had chosen, out of moral conviction, to serve the cause of freedom. The information he provided, the precise details of German bombing targets, the names of genuine, low-level German spies, and the structure of the Abwehr command, was considered invaluable, a testament to his access and bravery. He was a vital instrument in the British strategy of feeding carefully curated deception back across the Channel. And yet, in the most profound sense, to both sides, Emil Hartmann was a ghost. He possessed no discernible nationality. His accent, whether speaking German or English, was flawless, yet entirely unplaceable, the dialect of an educated internationalist who had shed the parochial dust of any single birthplace. His past was an engineered void, a series of cleverly planted half-truths and dead ends that satisfied the superficial queries of both sides but revealed nothing of the man beneath the carefully constructed facade. The terrifying genius of Emil Hartmann was this: he didn't serve a nation, he served his own survival. He was not loyal to the principles of the Allies or the ideology of the Axis. His allegiance was to the perpetual, high-stakes equilibrium of the double cross. He was the only player in a game of global espionage who truly understood the board, the pieces, and the hidden rules. He was not fighting for victory. He was fighting to keep the game alive, to ensure the two massive intelligence apparatuses remained in perfect, antagonistic symmetry, locked in mutual, useful delusion, a delusion whose linchpin was Emil Hartmann himself. This was the man who had mastered the art of non-existence, the architect of shadows who, by refusing to choose, had carved out the most dangerous, yet most secure, position in the entire theater of war. The introduction of Emil Hartmann into the labyrinthine world of wartime intelligence was a masterpiece of self-engineering, a perfectly executed maneuver that demonstrated his innate understanding of the vulnerabilities inherent in the human need for certainty and success. The story of his recruitment, when pieced together decades later from fractured and carefully guarded archives, reveals a phenomenon so audacious it forces a complete re-evaluation of the entire double-cross operation. According to the highly fragmentary files of MI5, specifically the records of Section B1A, the small, elite unit responsible for running double agents, the Ghost first materialized in the spring of 1938. The world was still clinging precariously to peace, but the air was thick with the expectation of war. The initial approach was made through a neutral intermediary in The Hague, a discreet, well-connected lawyer known to have dealings with disillusioned diplomats. The message delivered to the British attaché was stark. A disgruntled German officer of high intellectual caliber and significant military knowledge was willing to offer his services to the crown. MI5, initially skeptical, was quickly converted. The man who presented himself as Emil Hartmann spoke impeccable, slightly archaic English, the dialect of a classically educated gentleman, a far cry from the stilted language of a typical wartime defector. More critically, he offered immediate, verifiable proof of his access. He produced detailed, almost photographic sketches of the internal command structure of a key Luftwaffe air base in the Rhineland, complete with the names and personal details of senior officers, and, most damningly, a blueprint for an experimental bomber engine known only to a handful of high-ranking Luftwaffe personnel. The documents were, in the jargon of espionage, gold. They were too clean, too precise, and too sensitive to be anything but genuine. The sheer authenticity of the material was enough to overcome any lingering British suspicion. They recognized a strategic coup. MI5 immediately brought him in, assigning him the codename, the Albatross, and began the rigorous process of teaching him the tradecraft of a deep-cover double agent operating against the Abwehr. They believed they had turned a significant German asset, securing a man who was psychologically vulnerable to the moral call of the Allied cause. But here is where the narrative splits, where the strange phenomenon of the mirror image begins. Years later, when Allied intelligence teams systematically sifted through the captured archives of the German Abwehr in the ruins of Berlin, they found a document, chillingly similar to the MI5 file, detailing the exact same meeting, the same time frame, and the same individual. The German report, filed under the codename Nachtfach, confirmed that a German national, Emil Hartmann, an industrial consultant with deep international contacts, had approached the Abwehr in 1938. His proposition: he had successfully cultivated deep relationships within the British establishment and was now offering his services to infiltrate the highest levels of British intelligence. To the Abwehr case officer, the details were equally convincing. Hartmann had provided precise intelligence on the nervous, almost desperate state of British naval rearmament, along with the names of several junior Foreign Office officials known to be sympathetic to the German cause, information that was, again, verifiable and seemingly critical to German planning. The Abwehr believed they had secured a brilliant, patriotic agent, a German nationalist driven by loyalty to the fatherland, whom they immediately tasked with penetrating British intelligence and feeding them carefully vetted, low-level disinformation. Both sides thought they had initiated the recruitment. Both sides were convinced they had turned him to their cause. Both were wrong. The horrifying implication, which only a handful of senior analysts would ever truly grasp, was that Emil Hartmann had not been turned by either side. He was not a defector, he was an opportunist of terrifying efficiency. He had approached both intelligence services almost simultaneously, offering them tailored, equally convincing proof of his loyalty and access. He had fabricated the legend of Emil Hartmann not for a country, but for himself. He had constructed a position of absolute strategic advantage, placing himself at the perfect fulcrum point between two powerful, mutually antagonistic intelligence systems. He allowed both sides to believe they were controlling him, thereby granting himself the ultimate freedom, algorithmic independence. He was not the servant of the double cross, he was the architect of the double cross, a man who had consciously chosen to live in the permanent, dangerous space between two worlds. The operational life of a double agent is a study in sustained psychological pressure, a constant battle to maintain two complex, mutually exclusive narratives. But for Emil Hartmann, or the Albatross, or Nachtfach, the pressure was geometrically multiplied. He was not running one deception, he was running two, simultaneously, and the core challenge was not in fooling the enemy, but in keeping his two employers in a state of perfectly balanced, functional belief. Hartmann understood a critical principle of high-stakes espionage: the most convincing lie is a carefully curated stream of low-grade truth. His method was an intricate dance of equilibrium, a system of checks and balances designed to give each side precisely what they needed to believe in his value, but never enough to truly win the war. To the British, the Albatross, Hartmann's primary function for MI5 was to feed the Germans deception. This was the core of the British strategy, known as the double-cross system or the XX Committee, designed to mislead the Abwehr about everything from troop movements to bombing decoy targets. Hartmann became one of the key conduits for this strategic deception. His contributions: he regularly provided the British with genuine, but secondary, intelligence. The identification of real, lower-tier German spies operating in Britain easily sacrificed by the Abwehr for the sake of the grand deception or authentic reports on low-level Abwehr personnel changes. This established his credentials as a truly deep source. The balancing act: when feeding strategic deception back to the Germans via complex, coded radio transmissions managed by MI5, Hartmann ensured the deception was always believable. He argued with his British case officers, demanding that the fake information they gave him should be more subtle, more plausible, and interwoven with just enough hard truth to make it irresistible to the Abwehr. He was, in effect, teaching his controllers how to lie better, not for Britain's benefit, but for his own survival. To the Germans, Nachtfach. For the Abwehr, Hartmann's reports had to maintain the image of a patriotic German asset with vital access to the British command. His contributions: he provided the Abwehr with a steady flow of genuine, yet strategically harmless, high-level British information. This included accurate reports on non-critical cabinet discussions, genuine details on Royal Navy convoy schedules, routes that were about to change anyway, or true, but slightly dated, information on the deployment of certain RAF squadrons. This information was always valuable enough to justify his existence but never catastrophic enough to turn the tide of the war. The balancing act: crucially, he had to survive the deception the British were feeding through him. When the British fed deception, e.g., a fake troop deployment, was swallowed by the Abwehr via Nachtfach's radio reports and subsequently failed on the battlefield, the Abwehr would naturally question their source. Hartmann, with chilling foresight, always included preemptive clauses in his German reports. London command is highly effective at deception. My analysis suggests there is a 40% chance this information is being filtered. By sowing seeds of doubt, he ensured that when the deception failed, the blame fell not on him, but on the complexity of the intelligence landscape, a complexity he himself had orchestrated. The genius of his system was its perfect symmetry. The information he gave to the British about German morale was counterbalanced by the information he gave to the Germans about British political instability. He was constantly modulating the flow of data, like a sound engineer balancing a massive, complex audio board, ensuring that neither channel ever overpowered the other. His ultimate mission was to prevent either side from gaining a definitive, war-winning advantage. If the Allies began to win too quickly, the Germans would no longer need Nachtfach's high-level intelligence, and the system would collapse. If the Germans began to dominate, the British would be less reliant on the double-cross system, and the Albatross would become expendable. Emil Hartmann was not a spy. He was a strategic governor, keeping the engine of mutual deception running at a safe, sustainable pace. The result was a career of unbroken, deeply trusted service to two mortal enemies, neither of whom ever suspected that the lifeline they grasped was attached to a neutral, third player whose allegiance was solely to the sustained spectacle of the war itself. The sheer longevity and success of Emil Hartmann's operation, running a genuine, top-tier double agency without detection for the entire duration of the war, was not merely a stroke of luck. It was a testament to a level of tradecraft that bordered on performance art, transforming the very act of living into a sustained exercise in calculated ambiguity. Hartmann understood that a spy's greatest weapon is not the information he transmits, but the identity he projects. The physical and social void. Hartmann lived in a constant, meticulously controlled state of in-between residence. In London, he did not live in a lavish apartment or a shadowy tenement. He resided in a series of highly respectable, yet utterly forgettable, serviced apartments in Pimlico and Kensington, temporary addresses favored by minor international functionaries. He never developed a local social circle, his life a pattern of routine, solitary meals and late-night work sessions. He was a man always arriving, never settled. Cover. His official, British-sanctioned cover was that of an exiled German industrial consultant who had fled the excesses of the Nazi regime and was now working discreetly on post-war economic planning for the British government, a perfect excuse for high-level meetings and access to non-military, but politically sensitive, data. His German cover was the exact opposite. an industrial consultant secretly positioned to monitor British industrial capacity. The covers were mirrors of each other, satisfying both sides with the same simple narrative. Documentation. All his papers, the forged German passport, the genuine British identity card, the complex banking records, were constructed with a deliberate layer of falsifiable detail. MI5 would check his German documents, find slight inconsistencies planted by Hartmann, and assume the Germans were sloppy. The Abwehr would check his British documents, find similar bureaucratic holes, and assume the British were lax. By making his documents almost perfect, Hartmann ensured both sides felt smarter for spotting the flaws, thereby confirming their own control. The language of ambiguity. Hartmann's most potent tool was his communication. His reports, both to MI5 and the Abwehr, were characterized by a highly analytical, detached tone. They rarely contained emotional language or overt political passion. To MI5, his reports on the Abwehr were delivered with an air of professional regret, focusing on the bureaucratic incompetence and logistical failures of the Nazi war machine. He presented himself as a realist helping the British win, not an idealist fighting for freedom. To the Abwehr, his reports on the British government were delivered with an air of professional exasperation, focusing on the political infighting, the bureaucratic delays, and the inherent inefficiency of democratic decision-making. He presented himself as a patriot helping the Germans by exposing the fundamental flaws of the enemy. By employing this detached, analytical voice, Hartmann ensured that his loyalty appeared to be based on logical assessment rather than raw emotion. This professional distance was the ultimate protection against the emotional, sometimes hysterical, demands of wartime allegiance. The art of the meet. The physical meets with his case officers, both British and German, when traveling to neutral zones like Portugal or Sweden, were conducted with the same terrifying precision. British meets. They were held in cold, anonymous locations, a railway waiting room in Oxford, a back office of a shipping company in Liverpool. The British case officer, typically a meticulous, pipe-smoking major from MI5, was the dominant figure, giving instructions and receiving data. Hartmann was deferential, playing the role of the brave, but weary, agent receiving his orders. German meets. They were held in equally anonymous European capitals, often in crowded restaurants or quiet libraries. The German case officer, typically a stern, humorless Abwehr captain, was the dominant figure, giving instructions and receiving data. Hartmann was deferential, playing the role of the loyal, efficient asset receiving his mission. In every interaction, Hartmann played the role the other side expected him to play. He internalized the emotional scripts of both adversaries, ensuring that both his British and German controllers left the meeting feeling a deep, satisfying sense of control, the ultimate illusion that sustained the life of the forgotten spy. His entire existence was a carefully constructed feedback loop, a perfect, self-sustaining piece of theater designed to keep the audience, both the Allies and the Axis, utterly convinced. Emil Hartmann's true value, and the pinnacle of his unique double game, came during the crucial period leading up to the D-Day landings in 1944. This was the moment of ultimate risk, where the strategic deception campaign, Operation Fortitude, would either succeed in paralyzing the German command or fail catastrophically, exposing all double agents, including Hartmann, and jeopardizing the entire invasion. The success of Fortitude hinged on convincing Hitler that the main Allied invasion would not strike Normandy, but a far less fortified target, the Pas-de-Calais region, using a massive, entirely fictitious army group, FUSAG, 1st U.S. Army Group, led by General George S. Patton. Hartmann, the Albatross, became one of the key transmission conduits for this crucial deception. The Albatross's contribution to MI5. The British, knowing that the information had to appear utterly genuine, fed Hartmann details that seemed almost too good. They gave him evidence that Patton's enormous Phantom Army was concentrated in southeast England, preparing to cross at the narrowest point of the Channel, the Pas-de-Calais. But here, Hartmann showed his terrifying self-governance. He did not simply transmit the information. He argued with his MI5 case officer, Major Hugh Trevor Roper, that the information was too straightforward. He insisted on packaging the deception with layers of doubt, providing the Germans with a false choice. His transmission to the Abwehr was structured with deliberate ambiguity. Sources indicate a heavy concentration of Patton's forces in the southeast. However, the accompanying naval activity is unusually light, suggesting this may be a feint to draw away German forces from a secondary objective, possibly in the west. By presenting the deception, Pas de Calais, with a counter-theory, a secondary objective, he managed to achieve two critical things. He made the Pas de Calais threat more believable, because his analysis showed he had doubted it first. He preserved his own life, because when the real invasion hit Normandy, his earlier report would show he had, in fact, suggested a secondary objective in the west. Nachtfock's contribution to the Abwehr. The information, filtered and refined by Hartmann's genius, hit the Abwehr command in Paris with the intended effect. It confirmed their pre-existing belief that the Pas de Calais was the logical choice for the invasion. The sheer audacity of his detail, the number of non-existent landing craft, the false radio traffic for Patton's Phantom divisions, was overwhelming. The German response, tragically for them, was to swallow the deception whole. They kept the bulk of the 15th Army, over 15 divisions, stationed in the Pas de Calais, waiting for an army that did not exist. When the real invasion struck the beaches of Normandy on June 6, 1944, the German High Command refused to move the forces in the Pas de Calais for weeks. Why? Because Nachtfock's reports, backed by the entire double-cross system, had convinced them that the Normandy landing was the secondary objective, the feint he had predicted. Emil Hartmann had not only saved his own life but had arguably played a pivotal role in ensuring the success of the largest amphibious invasion in history. He had done this not out of loyalty to the Allies, but out of loyalty to his own complex, self-preserving strategy. He had successfully tricked his German employers just enough to secure the Allied victory, but had planted enough preemptive doubt in their minds to ensure that the eventual failure of the deception would not lead them to question the integrity of the source, Nachtfock. He was the single agent who managed to survive the most critical deception operation of the war because, unlike every other double agent, he had engineered his reports to be correct no matter the final outcome. His reports confirmed the fake attack, yet simultaneously hinted at the real one, a perfect, strategic hedge against history. Between the pivotal years of 1941 and 1944, as the war reached its apex of global conflict, Emil Hartmann cemented his legend. He ceased to be merely a double agent, he evolved into a spectral figure of international transit, a man who, in a world of closed borders and rigid control, maintained a frightening, fluid access to the beating hearts of both the Axis and Allied intelligence networks. His existence during this period was a masterclass in psychological compartmentalization and logistical manipulation, sustaining not two, but a phenomenal three separate lives, each perfectly tailored to its respective environment and audience. Life 1. The German officer in occupied Paris. For long stretches, Hartmann operated primarily as Emil von Kessel, an officer of the Abwehr, specifically, a highly ranked intelligence analyst and logistics coordinator, stationed in the luxurious, but paranoid, atmosphere of occupied Paris. The persona. This was his life of official authority. He wore the clean, sharp uniform of a German major, had access to the requisitioned apartments and high-end restaurants of the occupied city, and possessed the chilling power of his SS-vetted credentials. The function. His role here was to receive intelligence reports from Germany's spy network, analyze them, and consolidate them for high command. This position gave him unparalleled access to the genuine, unfiltered concerns of the Abwehr, their fears, their intelligence gaps, and the areas where they were most aggressively seeking information. This was his data acquisition center. He would subtly alter the incoming reports, smoothing over inconsistencies and exaggerating minor threats, creating a polished, but slightly misleading, narrative that flowed up to Berlin. The deception. He used this position to occasionally feed minor, verifiable leaks to resistance networks, information that served to solidify his own self-created myth as a German officer disillusioned with the regime's brutality, leaks which eventually found their way back to MI5, strengthening their conviction that the Albatross was a man of conscience on the inside. Life 2. The British informant in Lisbon. Lisbon, Portugal, was the glittering, shadowy nerve center of European espionage, a neutral city of spies, refugees, and diplomats. It was here, in the smoke-filled salons and grand hotel lobbies, that Hartmann became the Albatross, the British informant. The persona. In Lisbon, he dressed in the anonymous, expensive civilian attire of an international businessman. He would rendezvous with his MI5 handlers, usually a covert flight across the Bay of Biscay or a secretive meeting in a villa near Estoril, playing the role of the beleaguered hero, the man risking everything to deliver his precious intelligence. The function. This was his information output center. Here, he would transmit the carefully crafted disinformation provided by the British XX Committee to his German controllers via complex, layered radio cipher transmissions and, crucially, he would provide the British with the sanitized, strategically useless, but entirely genuine reports he had gleaned from his time as a major in Paris. He was the perfect channel for the British deception strategy, and his presence in a neutral zone gave the British a plausible excuse for the secrecy of his meetings. Life 3. The neutral trader in Spain and Switzerland. This was the life only Emil Hartmann truly understood, the life of the independent actor moving through the officially neutral, but morally ambiguous, zones of Switzerland and Spain. The persona. He became a financier, a broker of rare materials, a man of discreet power with impeccably tailored suits and a Swiss bank account. He traveled not on military orders, but on forged diplomatic papers from both the Abwehr, allowing him free passage across Vichy borders, and MI5 allowing him safe entry into Allied-controlled zones. The function. This was his logistical and financial base. It allowed him to establish legitimate, high-level business connections with individuals involved in the transfer of black market gold, jewels, and non-military strategic materials. He wasn't just surviving. He was building a vast, untraceable personal fortune. The money was his escape route, his guarantee of a comfortable post-war life, regardless of the conflict's outcome. He was making a fortune selling black market gold and information along the way. He used his unique access to German and Allied intelligence reports to predict market fluctuations and wartime scarcities, making his trading activities a perfect cover for his true profession. The ultimate deception. The British escort. The terrifying zenith of his logistical control occurred in late 1943. Hartmann needed to meet with a high-ranking Abwehr general in Madrid to secure critical new codes for the Nachtfach radio network. But Lisbon was too far, and Paris was too exposed. Hartmann convinced his MI5 case officer that he needed to meet a new German defector in Madrid to secure high-value intelligence. The reality. He used the British to escort him from Lisbon to Madrid, across the high-security checkpoint at the border. British agents, convinced they were protecting their invaluable asset, the Albatross, against German detection, facilitated his travel, secure lodging, and ultimate rendezvous. The absurdity was lost on his handlers. British intelligence agents were unknowingly serving as the armed escort for a German intelligence major to meet his own Abwehr superior. In Madrid, while the British agents nervously guarded the perimeter, Emil Hartmann met the Abwehr general. He received the new ciphers, assured the German he was maintaining his cover flawlessly, and then, after completing the meeting, returned to his British escort. He gave MI5 a detailed, fabricated report about the defector, which contained enough minor, genuine details to satisfy their operational review. Emil Hartmann was not merely traveling with forged papers from both intelligence agencies, he was traveling with the active, physical protection of one side, to deliver genuine service to the other. He was controlling both narratives, the British belief in his bravery and the German belief in his loyalty, using one to physically facilitate the needs of the other. The triple life was a perfect system of self-sustaining, self-financing deception. The intricate equilibrium that defined Hartmann's triple life was inherently fragile, depending entirely on the sustained mutual delusion of his two masters. By late 1944, as the war entered its final, bloody phase, the pressure began to break the system. The sheer volume of high-stakes deception, combined with the paranoia of both sides seeking a scapegoat for their failures, led to the initial, unsettling suspicion of betrayal. The British XX Committee, though satisfied with the success of Operation Fortitude, began to notice a pattern in the reports delivered by the Albatross. The information was always too clean, too balanced, and consistently predicted the most plausible outcome, never a true surprise. There was a growing unease among the analysts that their star asset was less a soldier of conscience and more a master bookkeeper, managing a precise, self-serving ledger. MI5, unwilling to risk exposing their entire double-cross network by interrogating the Albatross directly, initiated Operation Mirror, a secret, internal plan designed to definitively expose their agent by forcing him to betray himself. The trap. The new weapon test. The trap was built on a perfect, deadly piece of disinformation. MI5 fed the Albatross, highly detailed, but completely fabricated, intelligence about a non-existent new British weapon test, scheduled to take place at a secure, isolated military facility in northern France, a location still under tenuous German control. The intelligence given to Hartmann was excruciatingly specific. The target: an obscure, disused railway depot near the town of Lille. The date and time: precision timing for the test, a 4-hour window during the night. The weapon: vague descriptions of a new, experimental rocket-assisted artillery piece, a threat the Germans would be desperate to eliminate. The British goal was not to protect the depot, it was to observe the consequence of the leak. If the Albatross was truly loyal, he would use this information to feed a complex deception back to the Abwehr. If he was a double agent serving the Germans, he would transmit the information directly, hoping the Luftwaffe would bomb the site, thus proving his value to Berlin. The bombing and the proof. Days later, the answer arrived with terrifying clarity. That exact location was bombed by the Luftwaffe during the specified 4-hour window. The raid was not a random patrol or a speculative attack. It was a surgical strike involving 3 waves of specialized German fighter bombers, using the precise coordinates and timing provided in the Mi-5 fabrication. The damage was total. The intelligence was irrefutable. It was proof that Emil Hartmann, their most trusted asset, had leaked the information directly and without hesitation to the German High Command. His report to the Abwehr, transmitted via the Nachtwache channel, had undoubtedly framed the new weapon test as a vital, immediate military threat that needed to be neutralized. The XX Committee's suspicion was confirmed. The Albatross was not their soldier, he was the Abwehr's man, a deeply embedded penetration agent, and the entire double-cross system had been compromised from the start. The Vanishing Act. Allied command immediately dispatched an elite, heavily armed team of OSS Office of Strategic Services and Mi-5 security personnel to arrest him at his current safe house in London. The plan was airtight: secure the traitor, interrogate him under extreme duress, uncover the extent of the damage, and control the explosive political fallout. But when the team blasted through the door of the inconspicuous Pimlico apartment, they found only silence. The rooms were clean, ordered, and empty. He was gone. No frantic escape, no hastily packed suitcase, no sign of violence, no trace. The vanishing was too clean, too premeditated. It was not a flight of panic, it was a scheduled withdrawal. Hartmann, the master analyst, had foreseen the betrayal. He had anticipated the inevitability of Operation Mirror, knowing that in the endgame of any great deception, the players must eventually test the integrity of the board. The final message. 2 days later, Allied radio interception teams picked up a single, coded message, a short burst transmission from a remote, low-power transmitter somewhere in the Pyrenees Mountains between Spain and France. The signal was a one-time pad cipher, impossible to fully decode. However, the 3-word transmission was so short, the British analysts could only manage a partial decryption, but one word stood out, repeated 3 times for emphasis: the reflection always lies. The interpretation of this cryptic sign-off became the subject of decades of speculation. The tactical meaning: it was a taunt. The British, in seeking to expose him, had created a false reality, the mirror operation. Hartmann was confirming that he saw the reflection of their trap, and he knew it was a lie, a fabricated reality designed to catch him. The philosophical meaning: it was a summary of his career. The reflection was the double life, the mirror image of the Albatross and Nachtwache. By living both, he guaranteed that both were inherently untrue. The loyalty he projected to the British was a lie. The loyalty he projected to the Germans was a lie. His true self was the void between the reflections. The message confirmed that Hartmann was alive, secure, and had, in the ultimate irony, secured his freedom by sacrificing his own perceived loyalty to the British. The man who refused to choose had survived the choice, leaving behind only a cipher of his own brilliance. The failure of Operation Mirror and the subsequent vanishing of Emil Hartmann forced a painful, secret reassessment within the highest ranks of British and American intelligence. The true genius of the spy they called the Albatross had to be analyzed, not as a matter of morality, but as a matter of operational strategy. The consensus that emerged, whispered only among the senior members of the XX Committee, was that Hartmann was not simply a traitor, he was a revolutionary figure in espionage, the first algorithmic spy. The absence of sentiment. The greatest vulnerability of all human intelligence agents is sentiment. Love, hate, fear, patriotism, greed, and moral conviction all create predictable vectors that an opposing service can exploit. Emil Hartmann had systematically eliminated sentiment from his operational matrix. No patriotism. He was loyal to no flag, making ideological appeals useless. No greed. While he made a fortune, the money was a tool for survival, not a motivator for risk-taking. He would never jeopardize his primary operation for a quick financial gain. No fear. He operated in the ultimate high-risk environment, yet his moves were always predicated on cold, logical analysis, not emotional reaction. His operational decisions were not based on human psychology, but on mathematical probability. Every report he filed, every meeting he conducted, and every movement he made was calculated to maximize two non-negotiable variables: credibility, to maintain the confidence of both sides, and survival, to ensure his continued existence. The decision to leak. A flawless calculation. The final act. Leaking the new weapon test information to the Luftwaffe was the ultimate proof of his algorithmic approach. When faced with Operation Mirror, Hartmann instantly calculated the consequences of all possible actions. If he ignored the information, the British would know he was hedging, proving him cautious and therefore unreliable. If he fed the Germans deception, the Luftwaffe would fail to bomb the site. MI5 would be satisfied, but the Abwehr would eventually realize their source had lied, leading to his eventual exposure by the Germans. If he gave the Germans the truth, the fabricated truth, the Germans would successfully bomb the site, securing their faith in him as Nachtfach. The British would immediately know he was a German asset and attempt to arrest him. Hartmann chose option 3 because it offered the highest probability of immediate, clean escape and long-term security. By confirming himself as a German agent to the British, he triggered a predictable, linear response arrest, which allowed him to pre-plan his exit with absolute precision. Had he chosen option 2, the German reaction would have been slow, erratic, and unpredictable, making his escape far more perilous. He chose a strategic loss over a chaotic win. He used the British attempt to expose him as a logical trigger for his own meticulously planned retirement. His final act of betrayal was not an act of malice against the Allies, but an act of perfect self-optimization. The true lesson of Emil Hartmann, the one that the post-war intelligence services would attempt to internalize, was that the greatest threat in the game of espionage is not the enemy you know, but the neutral actor who views the entire war as an equation to be solved, and himself as the only constant. He was the first modern agent, a man of cold, hard logic, who understood that in the arena of total war, strategy trumps sentiment every single time. His vanishing was not a failure of intelligence, it was the ultimate, logical success of the world's first truly independent intelligence operative. The formal closure of the investigation into the Albatross marked the beginning of his enduring legacy. The truth of Emil Hartmann became one of the most protected, most sensitive secrets of the British intelligence establishment, a ghost story whispered in the halls of MI5. The obfuscation of history, the official narrative, carefully crafted by the remaining members of the XX committee, was one of controlled failure. The final report, the official internal file stated that the Albatross was, in fact, an SS penetration agent who had successfully deceived the double-cross system for years. His exposure, though costly, was cited as a testament to the vigilance of MI5. The gold story, the fabricated Nazi gold, the mission that allowed him to disappear, was actively promoted. It served as a perfect decoy, leading multiple Allied agencies on fruitless, decades-long searches in neutral Europe, ensuring that the search for Emil Hartmann, the traitor, was replaced by the search for Emil Hartmann, the man who knew where the gold was. The whispers of survival, despite the official narrative, the final, cryptic radio message, the reflection always lies, haunted the analysts. They knew the money wasn't the goal, it was the mechanism. The real goal had always been freedom. Decades later, fragments of unconfirmed intelligence reports surfaced, suggesting the ghost may have appeared in the most unlikely of places. Latin America. Rumors of a wealthy, anonymous financier living in Buenos Aires in the early 1950s, a man of precise habits who spoke half a dozen languages flawlessly but claimed no nation. The Swiss banking sector. Accounts of an extremely powerful, non-Swiss consultant in the Zurich banking sector, a man whose unique, almost prophetic knowledge of global political instability allowed him to move vast sums of wealth with terrifying foresight. The key to his survival was his post-war strategy. He did not hide. He simply became a part of the international elite, a system that, like him, operated without national borders or fixed loyalties. He had correctly calculated that the anonymity of vast wealth and international mobility was a far more effective shield than any fortified bunker. Emil Hartmann, the architect of shadows, the man who had perfected the art of the triple life and the algorithmic double cross, never returned to the war-torn world he had left behind. He had used the conflict not as a battleground for ideology, but as a crucible for his own ultimate, perfect, and terrifying freedom. He remains the definitive, unapprehended ghost of World War II, a testament to the chilling power of logic and the absolute neutrality of genius.